Welcome to this session of the Cloud Exchange. My guest is LaLisha Hurt, the industry advisor at Splunk. LaLisha, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
As we've heard all day today, we're continuing to talk about cloud and how it's really being impactful across the federal government. And I think the first part we're going to say is start with some of those trends you're starting to see. I think every agency is at a different point of their cloud journey. Some are further along than others. We know that. But I think that when you talk about cloud and you talk about the federal government, they have been on this path now for the better part of 10, 11 years, 12 years. Cloud first, cloud smart. Now I'm hearing people talk about the next generation of cloud. What are some of those trends you're seeing from your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one that comes up in every conversation is what are those big trends for this year and even beyond, Jason. And so I think cloud used to be an option, as we all know, but I think it's important to share that nearly 9 out of every 10 IT leaders says it's really the cornerstone of their digital strategy, per a 2023 State of the Cloud report. And so a couple of trends we're seeing this year, like I said, we expect to see them in the years to come, are around the obvious one that everyone in the industry is talking about. So I can't not speak about this one, which is our favorite, AI and machine learning, where we will see increased automation and self-learning capabilities, and I think more personalized cloud experiences. Also, we can expect to see more adoption, I think, around multi-cloud and hybrid IT strategies, where we're combining, obviously, on-prem, dedicated private cloud, several public clouds, and even those legacy applications and platforms, to include mainframe, by the way, because people are still actually on the mainframe. We'll also see a larger focus on cloud security and resilience, which expanded use of security as a service providers. And I think we'll see predictive technology to really help detect risks before they actually arise, especially since the most recent national cybersecurity strategy rollout. And then lastly, this is a fun one I just throw in there, not necessarily relevant to the Fed Civ agency population, but I think we're going to see cloud gaming as a significant driver with the introduction of 5G in the future. Just a fun one there. And so Gartner experts forecast, I think, almost $600 billion in worldwide public cloud spend this year. And so I'm pretty sure we're tracking rather close to that number thus far, and we'll continue to see that grow.
I know, as you said, this is not necessarily the focus of our conversation, but cloud gaming, I think a lot of the folks in DoD and some of those other agencies are starting to say, what could we do with that, with the 5G, and how could we kind of use it for AR, augmented reality, obviously, and all the things that come with the better latency. But I'll take us back to the boring stuff. Maybe I love the fact you talk about increased automation, self-learning capabilities, more personalized cloud. Do you think that's that next step? Okay, we've done a lot of the easy stuff, so to speak. We've done a lot of the email and the collaboration stuff. So now it's, what does this mean for specific mission areas, or are you seeing some examples that you maybe want to highlight of agencies starting to use some of these trends or some of these self-learning capabilities as an example?
Yeah, I think we're definitely starting to see. I'll go back to machine learning, everyone's favorite. It's definitely growing in popularity as a new buzzword because it significantly enhances cloud visibility, providing those deeper insights into cloud operations and effective management of cloud resources. Obviously, everyone's favorite. It's valuable for helping manage cloud costs and really optimizing those resources. And so I think we'll continue to see agencies start to rally around AI and machine learning, right? And I think it's helping with anomaly detection. So looking at those anomalies in cloud usage that might indicate that there's an issue, such as the sudden rise in cloud storage or compute resource use. We're also seeing a little bit more optimization, where agencies are using machine learning to help analyze usage patterns and make recommendations for optimizing kind of the utilization for their environment. And so this might involve suggesting changes to the type and sizes of resources. It could be recommending when to use reserve instances or identifying those underutilized resources that could be scaled back or eliminated. And so those are just a couple of examples where we're seeing that across, I would say, quite a few agencies. Definitely looking more into automation. I think folks are looking, how do we automate some of those manual operations to help with efficiencies holistically.
It's interesting, when you talked about AI and ML, you went to kind of almost the use of cloud to manage the day-to-day. I was expecting, to be honest, when you started talking AI and ML, looking for anomalies, I said, oh, we're going to cybersecurity. I thought that's the part of the conversation we were going to, but I really like the fact you brought up the fact that it's more than just, oh, cyber. I think that's the hot thing that a lot of CIOs and folks talk about, but understanding your usage patterns, understanding, oh, when do I bring in my reserve instances? When do I have underutilized resources? I think that's something that's not talked about a lot when we talk about cloud computing. Do you get a sense of why? Is that a not new, but new feature? Or people just, maybe folks in the federal civilian world, just starting to understand a little better about, oh, I can use these maybe advanced or emerging technologies differently than I thought I could, or maybe I didn't think about before? Anything you'd offer?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a convergence, right? We're talking about cloud and cyber together, whereas before we talked about them separately, right? And so I think that's where you see that convergence of AI, machine learning. Of course, we can talk about it from a cyber perspective, but I think after you migrate, or when you're migrating, you should start to think about the two as one, right? And I start to have those conversations with the agency. It's like, you don't want to have a cloud strategy and a cyber strategy, right? When you think about digital transformation, you should be thinking about combining the two of them and not talk about them separately. And so when I do have conversations with the CISOs, the CIOs, I typically like to have those conversations together, right, versus separately, because you do touch upon, obviously, cloud usage, the infrastructure side of the house, but you have to talk about security, right, at that same conversation.
I think that's a really important point that I'd like to just maybe underline for a second. When you are moving forward with digital transformation, you rarely hear folks say, oh, well, what's your cloud strategy? Okay, now what's your cyber strategy? They're not combining them. Is that a weird conversation or an unusual one to have? Or maybe folks just aren't talking about it, but when you ask to talk to the CISO and CIO together, they're like, yeah, of course we'll be here together. What kind of reaction are you getting?
I think the reaction is, I think initially it may be a little shocking, but once we start sharing use cases and we start talking about unified platforms as a solution to solve for both, I think the conversation gets a little bit easier, right? So we typically talk about mission use cases, not necessarily the bolts and nuts and cyber technology. And I think when you transform the conversation towards mission outcomes, business focus, you naturally and organically just start to have those conversations about both without them even knowing it, right? So I think it starts off as hard, but then it gets easier once you pivot that conversation.
What do you mean? You're telling me people don't want to talk about all the excitements of cybersecurity as you're moving to the cloud, and it's like the old enterprise architecture discussion. Nobody wants to talk about enterprise architecture.
Yeah, I think when you start to move the conversation beyond that and talk about, like I said, how do I impact my business and mission outcomes, right? How do I think more broadly around digital transformation holistically, as opposed to talking about cloud migration, technology, cyber. And so it's a different conversation. And I'm happy that we're shifting it towards that way, because I think it provides that common unified language that we all can speak to, right? Trying to do what's right to meet our residents and citizens where they are, to make sure we're providing those applications and digital services that they need.
You bring up digital transformation. Let's go ahead down that path a little bit, because there's much more than just cloud when we talk about digital transformation. You brought up cyber, obviously a very important piece, but there's a whole part about understanding what your customers want, the customer journey. We acknowledge them about customer experience. What are you seeing? What are some other considerations that agencies need to keep in mind as they really start to focus on this idea of digital transformation? I'm going to say beyond bringing that CIO and CISO together, which is a great point.
Yeah, I think strategy is key. So I'll share some of the things that work well, some of the things that don't work well that I've seen, just to have a framework here. So jumping right into a cloud and digital transformation strategy without first understanding your environment, your data, what's critical, what's not, where and how it's stored. I know it sounds fundamental and very simple, but you'd be surprised. Many people do not know the answers to these, right? I think what works well, Jason, is taking a step back and implementing that cohesive data strategy that really considers all your data sources, right? It integrates them effectively across silos, and it delivers kind of comprehensive visibility across the IT environment, right? And kind of moving away from, and this is a common conversation, of just relying on kind of those fragmented tools and processes, and really consolidating around that comprehensive platform that I talked about that really unifies security and observability. So those are a couple of things that we're starting to see a shift in what's working well. And I would say, and this probably goes without saying, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I think in doing so, it's important to have that executive sponsorship and buy-ins, right? To really cultivate, you talked about a cloud first, cloud smart, right? Culture, environment, where everyone's actually rowing in the same boat together in the same direction. And we're not taking ourselves back where we're having folks rowing towards, hey, I gotta have those on-prem applications. I don't want to move to the cloud. I don't trust the cloud. I don't want to put my data there, right? And so I think it starts there. And that's where I've seen agencies really be successful, is when they take a step back from the technology and the widgets and the actual implementation and focus on that holistic, comprehensive strategy for digital transformation.
Are you finding, again, each agency is different. We know that you can work with one agency, they're a little further ahead on the spectrum than the other. But do you find that they're doing this idea of having this holistic strategy in pockets, or are you finding more and more agencies have that bigger holistic strategy against either across the entire mission sector or some sort of part of the agency? What are you starting to see among agencies as they kind of step out of this? We got to move to the cloud and we have to digitally transform.
Yeah, I will say we're getting there, Jason, but we're moving probably slower than we probably could. And I think because we're getting stuck in the migration activities, the implementation, of course, we have to do those things, but what happens beyond the migration? What happens beyond the implementation and adoption? And so I'm seeing the shift. I wouldn't say a majority of agencies are there yet. I'm being very vague here, but I would love to see more of that. Let's put it that way. I would love to lean in more and help with those digital transformation strategies versus, hey, LaLisha, come in and help us with the roadmap for cloud, right? How do I get there from A to Z? But more so, I would love to see the conversations be more around, what's our digital transformation strategy holistically, to include cloud, right? But it could include other aspects as well, according to those things that I mentioned, like automation, other things. So I think starting to integrate all of the greatness that we're doing across the agencies into one strategy would be great, but we're not quite there yet, but I do see progress.
Well, as we know, it's like rolling the ball up the hill. Each rotation is a little bit better. Do we ever get to the top? Probably not, but that's okay. We keep making progress. I think one of the things when we talk about making progress, and you kind of hinted at this early on in the conversation as we were talking about cloud, is a lot of agencies are going to live in this hybrid environment. They're going to have some stuff in the cloud. They're going to have some stuff on-prem. You also mentioned mainframes. There's a balance there that I think agencies are trying to strike. And what are you seeing among them about how to kind of maintain those current operations, modernize for the future, how to strike that right balance?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, one of the things, I'll share some customer examples of where I think this may show up, and I would love for agencies to do more storytelling and sharing across agencies around their successes and best practices and even lessons learned as they navigate the journey. But the customers that I'm finding that are most successful in this journey, and again, it goes back to strategy, I won't touch on that again, but making that decision to go to a multi-cloud strategy is a big one. But what I find is understanding and identifying kind of your why for your migration beyond just the typical cost savings that we often hear, right? I hear that all the time. I want to move to the cloud because I want to save money, right? But those that are like really clearly identifying their pain points, looking to industry solutions that align to those pain points, they're measuring business outcomes after the migration occurs, and those that continue to improve and optimize beyond migration, I think are finding the most success. For example, I did work with a federal civilian agency, which I'll leave their name out of the discussion here, whose IT organization moves to cloud-based services to align, obviously, to their organization's cloud strategy. They wanted to actively reduce their IT infrastructure and maintenance costs, but they also wanted to achieve higher agility and scalability to meet the business changing needs, which was their kind of why. But some of the pain points they were facing, kind of prior to the migration may resonate with some, maybe they're new, but they're around, excessive time and resources spent on those kind of admin, mundane tasks, right? Instead of, spending time on those high value use case delivery. They had issues. We talk about compliance and risk and security, but they actually had significant issues maintaining compliance and meeting security standards. And they're always experiencing kind of significant difficulties with supporting their business. So when we talk about those multi-cloud strategies, I think that's one of the things that you have to consider, right? What are some of your pain points? What are your challenges? What are you trying to achieve? And ask yourself fundamentally, is that the right approach for you, right? Everyone's talking cloud, everyone's talking multi-cloud, but it may or may not be the right approach for you. In many cases, it can be, but I would say those that find the success and really the value from that transformation sat down and really spent time on, where are we struggling at? Is this the right approach for me to get there? And so they're also partnering. I can't not have this conversation without saying, Jason, they're also partnering, right? I think that's key. If you can't do it yourself, it's okay to ask for help and partner with, industry providers, cloud providers that can help you along this journey as well.
I really love that example. I think a lot of agencies get caught up in, we got to move, got to move, got to move. And your example is a good one, because understanding what you're trying to achieve, what's your end goal? Is it to move everything to the cloud? Is it just to move certain systems to the cloud? Is it not even that? It's, oh, this process to serve this citizen is really broken. How do we fix it? Okay, well, we could stay on-prem, we could move to the cloud. What's the end result? That's the one thing I see too, is that business outcome discussion among CIOs and others in the program world is really much more at the forefront than ever before. Is that the other thing that you find as you sit down with clients, that they are asking the right questions, versus, as you alluded to a decade ago, it was all about how can I save money? Are you getting more about how do we fix the business or improve the business outcome? Or is it still, again, who knows? It depends on who and when and how.
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on there, Jason. And we're shifting the conversation. I do get questions around how do I align my cloud services, like I said, to the business and mission needs, right? To make sure I'm driving outcomes beyond just efficiency, agility. Some of the common questions that we all circle around a lot, I would say, that are consistent is, how do I build that multi-cloud strategy and approach for speed, resilience, and business value are kind of the key things we're hearing now. So we're transitioning from the cost conversation, which is great. How do I integrate, those cloud technologies to serve as a force multiplier for my digital strategy? So that goes back to, how do I integrate applications? How do I integrate services and not look at them as standalone technologies? Also, this is a big one that I get a lot, and I think it's just the nature of where we are, is how can I leverage these services to help me mitigate these regulatory and security risks that I have for my agency, right? That's paramount right now. I would say that's probably number one, top of mind for folks that I'm talking with. And then also, how do I kind of expand and scale into new modern services to meet kind of residents where they are with our applications that I talked about? And this is really to help with digital services like disability benefits, tax, government loan programs. So definitely seeing a shift in mindset around, how do I better provide these services to the citizens with this strategy, which I think is a great step in the right direction.
the regulatory compliance issues, the challenges that come with that, I think that's a underestimated value of using certain services, especially when you start talking about automation and, oh, I can automate that data collection for my Federal Information Security Management Act, my FISMA report to Congress, or my normal weekly, monthly, daily data dump to CISA. And then the other side of it also is it can work for industry too, because there's a lot of compliance issues that industry is also facing. So it's kind of like there's the two sides of the same coin that both can benefit from these things. I'm interested to know why you're getting a lot of questions around regulatory compliance and challenges there. Like it seems I guess I'm a little surprised by it, but in a good way. Do you get a sense of why agencies, is it because it takes so much of their time, because they don't have the people? What's driving that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. I think it's the resources, right? And I'm sure we're going to talk about this, the talent, the workforce, stuff like that. But I think it's the resources, and some of the tasks are manual, right? So we get a lot of questions on, do you have anything to help us with automating some of these activities? Do you have a framework or solution that takes all of these requirements and industry regulatory controls and puts them in a one place and helps me manage them, right? So it's speaking to that automation again. So I think it's just folks are looking across the board. Where can I automate? Where can I get smarter? And believe it or not, the regulatory controls, requirements, controls is another one of those spaces where it can be done.
LaLisha, you brought up two important things here. You brought up workforce, and you brought up the kind of that idea of planning for the future. So let me start on the second one, planning for the future. As agencies are moving towards that next generation of cloud services, they actually have to think about the budget. Cloud isn't free. It's like everyone wants to plug in their electric car, but they realize electricity actually costs money too.
Yeah.
What should they have to keep in mind about how they're going to budget for today's, tomorrow's, a year from now, 5 years from now, those cloud services?
Yeah, so agencies' cloud budget will obviously vary, right? But I think it depends on the complexity of the environment as well as the unique mission needs. But here's the thing, there are some factors to consider, I think, holistically, no matter where you are on the journey. And they're very simple, and they go back to cost, and there's things that folks should be thinking about now before they start to plan a budget. And they're simple. One is users. I think this is one of the common factors that impact cloud computing that we forget about, right? And it can drive provider costs up or down depending upon your future plans. And so now is the time to get that right on the onset, right? And think about your potential growth, think about any plan reduction initiatives that you have for the future, and make sure you get that right, because that is a big driver in costs and budgeting that sometimes we're accurate on and sometimes we're not, but it can make a big difference. The second thing I would say, Jason, is around storage. Make sure you understand the type of storage that's required for your environment so that you can budget for it. There's so many different, storage tier approaches. And I find that some people select the ones that they may or may not need, just because they're trying to meet, retention or regulatory requirements. So that's another lever that I think folks can start to pull as they think about how much they're going to spend and what they need to budget for. And then lastly, I would say, think about the support model, right? You'll have for your agency. This can be another important cost driver to consider as well. Will you lean on IT providers or cloud providers? Will your provider kind of serve as your first call support for users, or will you handle that internally? Those are some of the questions you probably should ask yourself before you start to think about your budget for the future. And like I said, believe it or not, Jason, when we do cloud value assessments with customers, we ask some of these, fundamental questions to help, give them some recommendations. And they have to go out and gather the stuff. They don't have it readily available, but they've also already put in their budget for cloud services for next year, which I find hard to do if you don't kind of understand those basics. So just a few things to consider before the next physical government budget season for folks.
We are heading right into the 2025 budget as you talk. So good timing on that. And I enjoyed the fact you said storage. A lot of people don't understand that you can't leave all your data, especially your long-term data, your records management type data, your in cloud forever, because there is a cost there. And that's why I think the multi-cloud, the hybrid environment is going to stay on. LaLisha, in our last few minutes together, let's just talk about the workforce, because that's the other piece to this journey that I think folks sometimes struggle with. They understand the value of the workforce, the hiring, the retaining, the reskilling of the workforce, but they really do need to prepare them for that next generation of cloud services. I'll go back to the trends question. Are you seeing certain trends, certain questions that are being asked from your agency clients when it comes to, okay, what's our workforce have to be prepared for?
Yeah, so I read a McKinsey report the other day that highlighted kind of those top 10 technologies for 2025, just for giggles, right? I want to stay abreast of what's the prediction for 2025. And so on the list, of course, you had the AI, you had the virtual augmented reality, advanced robotics, but I will say, cloud technology was number 4 on that list alongside the others. So what does that mean? It means it's not going away. In fact, it means we have to double down and prepare now for what we'll need for the future to ensure our workforce is ready for those next generation of cloud services. And so, interestingly enough, some of the conversations that I'm having with agencies are around skills inventory assessment, right? To really focus in on where are my gaps today from a domain perspective in comparison to what skill sets I will need for the future. And so there's tools and apps and things out there to help visualize those, assuming you have data from HR systems as a starting point. I think also we talk a lot across the government about obviously upskilling and reskilling, which is great, but how are we actually doing that? Are you just sending individuals to theoretical training classes and pushing them to cloud certifications? Or are we actually pairing and teaming them up with experts and organizations that can help them get kind of hands-on network infrastructure skills from simulated exercises? This month, actually, DHS announced its plans for a DHS IT Academy, which will bolster their existing workforce technology skills and quickly train new hires who are entering the fray to help them modernize its legacy IT systems, which I think is a phenomenal step in the right direction. Some agencies I've seen are actually setting up sandboxes and simulated lab environments where their employees can apply their learnings in a safe environment where it's okay to make mistakes or fail, right? There's not going to be any major repercussions in doing so. So it's creating that kind of safe learning environment. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves too in the government is, do you have kind of like that central knowledge sharing repository somewhere such that when those tenured employees decide to retire, which they will, right, or move on to another agency perhaps, do we have continuity for that next person that we onboard for that knowledge? I think is a big key concern. And so I had a workforce discussion conversation with OPM and Department of Energy leaders recently, and they're actually setting up rotation programs where their employees are getting exposed and experience working in different parts of the tech organization, and they're even, doing some interagency rotations, which I think is great, and we haven't seen that in the past. And then lastly, this goes without saying, I think we have to do better with partnering with companies and organizations that can help us augment these skill gaps where it makes sense, right, to help us accelerate this journey if we don't have the time to ramp up and train folks. And so last, I'll just say here, Jason, this is a big topic. We probably could have had a conversation on this all by itself, but this past week, I actually had the opportunity to join Carnegie Mellon University's CISO and CRO symposium that kind of brought together a bunch of leaders across the globe. And one thing they offered up to everyone in the room, which I thought was great, is that they actually have undergraduate and graduate students that they actually team up to do capstone projects for agencies and companies to help them solve real world business problems. And so this could be leveraged, right? It's free. And I thought to myself, right, why aren't more agencies partnering with universities to tap into this workforce pipeline? I mean, they're cyber professionals, they're data analytics, they're cloud skilled folks. And so I would love to see us do more partnership in that space to prepare for the future.
LaLisha, there's a lot more to talk about workforce. My colleague Justin Doubleday did a great job on the IT Academy story at DHS. We could talk about that, as you said, probably for another 25 minutes. But unfortunately, we're out of time for this session of the Cloud Exchange. So let me thank my guest. LaLisha Hurt is the industry advisor at Splunk. LaLisha, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cloud Exchange.